It is inevitable, a fact, a certainty. All of us are born to die. But what then? From our earliest beginnings, human beings have yearned to know what lies beyond death. More than 2,000 years ago, Plato wrote that all earthly wisdom is but a rehearsal for a great awakening, an awakening that takes place upon death. Every religion and culture share one commonality: belief there is life after death. The subject of life after death is a common topic of discussion among physicians and scientists around the world. Scientific proof is sought, and modern techniques are being used to research a subject that was once taboo. It took one man to discover that there was a common thread in near-death experiences. It was he who broke new ground by studying the cases of those who were diagnosed clinically dead and then returned to life. This man is Raymond Moody. He is a classically trained PhD in philosophy with an MD in psychiatry. Dr. Moody's first book, Life After Life, paved the pathway for near-death studies. Today, Dr. Moody's findings have become part of the language of the academic, medical, and spiritual communities. It was he who coined the phrases life after life, near-death experiences, and light at the end of the tunnel.
I did not start life as a particularly religious person. As a matter of fact, what I like to say about my background is that we were not religious and called it Presbyterian. My approach to life was trying to figure out things by the scientific method. And in that context, of course, I had always assumed that death is just an obliteration of consciousness. It's like the lights going off, only permanently. And when I started hearing about all of this stuff about, quote, a life after death, my reaction essentially was, give me a break. I thought that this was people fooling themselves and engaging in wish fulfillment and that sort of thing. In 1965, when I was 21 years old, I was an undergraduate student of philosophy at the University of Virginia. And one of my philosophy professors, John Marshall, told me about a psychiatry professor there at the university, Dr. George Ritchie, who had had a quite amazing experience when he had been pronounced dead some years before. And since up to that point, I had always assumed that at that point where the doctor declares you dead, there's no more consciousness, I was highly intrigued that here was a person who was quite sane and reputable, very beloved in the community and so on, who had had quite a different experience than when he was pronounced dead. In fact, had very vivid states of consciousness. But you know, when you hear one thing like that out of a void that's so contrary to what you have always assumed on instinct for the rest of your life, you just don't know what to make of it. In 1969, after I'd gotten my PhD in philosophy, I was teaching. And one day, one of my students came up after class and quite unsolicited said, Dr. Moody, I wish we could talk more about life after death in this philosophy class. And I remember him kind of emphasizing that word philosophy as though I was somehow amiss in not talking about what he regarded as an important issue. But at that time, I thought that that was just an antique notion, you know, and I remember asking him, well, why do you want to talk about that, as though that's something that a modern philosophical perspective would not really be interested in. And he said, because about a year ago, I was in a bad accident and my doctors said I died. And I had an experience that has totally changed my life. And I haven't had anybody to talk about it with. Well, you know, obviously I wanted to hear this. So I invited him into my office, and to my absolute astonishment, I remember to this day how surprised I was. He told me identically what I had heard from George Ritchie 4 years before. And the moment I heard that story, I realized that this was something that had to be fairly common, because it was obviously, you know, an impossible coincidence that I would have stumbled across the only 2 cases of this that existed over a 4-year period without even attempting to find cases of it. So at that moment, as I said, I realized, hey, this is something that is worth looking into, and that there will be more of these. And I particularly wanted to find out why scholars hadn't written about this, and why I, who had spent up to that time my whole life studying the human mind, had not ever heard of this. And then when I went to medical school, of course, that was a great opportunity to go to the codes after the patients had had cardiac arrest that I would hear about, and I would go and sit with them and talk with them, and patients would, in fact, tell you the same kind of story. Again and again, the same kinds of events that I had first heard from George Ritchie many years before. That was how I wrote Life After Life. There's a great deal of spiritual inspiration in talking with people who've returned from the verge of death, and to see how their lives have been so positively transformed often by these experiences. George Ritchie once said to me, quote, "Raymond, this experience makes your humanity even more of a burden."
Up until this point, Raymond Moody's work had drawn him almost exclusively to those individuals who had experienced a close encounter with death. But now his focus shifted to a second group, those whom death had separated from a loved one, the bereaved and grief-stricken. Once again, his curiosity was triggered by an experience that many of them shared.
We have known for a long time in medicine that a high percentage of people who are bereaved, who've lost someone to death, will, within a certain period of time of the death, have an experience which they regard as seeing and being in the presence of the departed loved one. As a matter of fact, there are several separate medical studies that have been conducted independently that suggest that as many as 2/3 of widows will have the experience of seeing or hearing from their husbands after the husbands have died. But we know from clinical observation that this is true of other bereaved people as well, bereaved siblings, bereaved parents, bereaved children, bereaved friends of the deceased, and that this is a remarkably common human experience. The mere fact that, as we know from the medical studies, these experiences are remarkably common, means that we human beings are highly predisposed to experiences like that. Well, then, why can't we at least try to conceptualize a way of bringing circumstances together in such a way as to increase the likelihood that a given individual will have that experience at a given time and place?
In search of an answer to this tantalizing question, Dr. Moody returned once more to his studies of philosophy, in particular the writings of the ancient Greeks. He vaguely recalled an account by the Greek historian Herodotus about a technique for communicating with the dead.
I had read something in Herodotus about a place that the Greeks had where allegedly one would travel to see one's relatives and friends. I went to the archaeological reports that I could find, and I discovered that in fact This place had actually been located in 1957. The site had been rediscovered by an archaeologist. I had a very interesting exchange with him over a period of a couple of days, discussing with him his original excavations and his work at this certainly phenomenal site.
Not for the deaths. All the men, every man
That's
would
right.
make it to
That's
see
right.
on the
That's right.
surface of the water.
That's right. Visions, exactly, exactly. Dr. Dockerus, in his search for this site, surmised that, in fact, the oracle was in the northwest corner of Greece in Epiros. Homer talks about the oracle being located at a point where two rivers flowed together to form the Acheron River, and that there was a pinnacle of rock. All Dr. Dockerus did was to trust Homer and to go to the location that he believed Homer was talking about, excavated, and indeed did find this subterranean complex there exactly at the location where he surmised Homer had located it. The institution was subterranean. This was another factor in why it was so long undiscovered. Even in its heyday, in antiquity, it was entirely underground. In approximately 160 BC, the Romans burned the Oracle of the Dead, and at this point, this dropped out of Western civilization as we know it. Then subsequently, in about 350 AD, the church banned it. They made it anathema for a Christian to believe that a spirit can be seen in a mirror. And so for that reason, we have had no continuing tradition of evocation of the deceased in Western civilization. Dr. Dockerus observed, even prior to his discovery of the oracle site in 1957, that it was a folk belief among the local inhabitants that the entrance to the other side was nearby. So it's astounding that this tradition persisted in the folklore of the region for literally many centuries. Plato has been my favorite philosopher since 1962, and I've always loved the ancient Greek culture. So to me, it was just a really overwhelming experience to be able to go there and to walk around some of these places that I had read about for the better part of my life, and to be able actually to go to this institution, the Necromantium as it's called in the locality, and stand on those places that Herodotus wrote about and that I believe Homer described so beautifully. It was absolutely thrilling. We're here at one of the most amazing places in the world, to me at least. This is the Oracle of the Dead at Ephora, where in ancient times people would come to actually see and visit with the spirits of their departed loved ones. Until recent times, scholars have assumed that what was going on here was simple fraud, in the sense that we in the 20th century West presumably know that such things that were described here by the ancient writers can't be. But in light of recent developments and research that's been done now by many psychologists replicating the experience of seeing apparitions of the departed, we can now have a plausible explanation of what was going on in this rather amazing sanctuary. And now we come through this entranceway of enormous stones into a courtyard which is laid out to give the impression that one is in a cave or in an underground world, One has to imagine that in antiquity this was roofed over so that we literally felt as though we were in the underworld. At this point, the pilgrims would have been met by the psychagogues, the guides who lived here to conduct the pilgrims through the experience of visiting with their deceased. As we go in a little bit into the more functioning part of the oracle proper, we find immediately in front of us here a wall. The right part of the wall was a medieval addition. The Byzantine church built a chapel here in medieval times on the ruins of the ancient oracle. And now we are in the operative part of the oracle. A sharp right turn at the end of the corridor brings one into a maze with narrow passageways, sharp turns, and it's good to remember that all of this was in pitch black. And then the visitor came to the last turn of the maze, passed through it into the apparition chamber proper, through these heavy doors. And as the apparition seeker came into this room, one can only imagine what was going through his or her mind, because this was the culmination of the journey. The pilgrim walked across, he walked into the apparition area proper. And in here, the seeker underwent the culmination of his journey. In this room, there was a big bronze cauldron. I believe it was probably highly polished and filled with water to make, in effect, a big mirror. The pilgrims would encircle it, gaze into the cauldron, and there, in the reflective surface, initially see images which, in many cases, no doubt, would then appear to emerge from the reflective surface, come out actually into the physical environment, full color, full size, three-dimensional, and no doubt, in many of the cases, talking, so that the seeker would experience the living presence of the person who had died. I'm quite convinced from my own experiments in the United States that after the seeker would leave this room, he was totally a different person. From then on, for the rest of his life, dramatically changed by what happened to him in here. And finally, after this experience in the apparition hall, the pilgrims were led here into this chamber, which was a purification room, where they were purified by bathing in sulfur, which was the ancient way of purifying anyone who had been in contact with the dead. Then, after the sulfur bath, they were led out of here, down the hill, to the river Acheron, where they received the ritual bath. Each time I come back here, I feel a little more confident that, in fact, now we do know what was going on here, at least in outline, and that we can now demonstrate psychologically that it is, in fact, quite possible to have visitations with the deceased, exactly as the ancients believed, and contrary to the opinion of 2 millennia now of scholars. I often reflect that if history had been a little bit different, if we had taken up the Greek tradition of evoking apparitions just as we did the tradition of democracy and the notion of history, our notion of science, so many of the institutions that we value in the West, we might have had a very, very different culture indeed.
But the practice of evoking apparitions through clear depth gazing did not vanish entirely. Rather, it went underground. It became a favored tool of mystics and metaphysical scholars. The most famous of them was a 16th century Frenchman known as Nostradamus. He used a crystal ball to assist him in predictions. Nostradamus had a contemporary in England whose name was Dr. John Dee.
He was an inveterate scholar, and by the time that he was 19 years old, he was already an instructor in Greek at Cambridge University. He became an expert in mathematics. He wrote one of the standard textbooks of mathematics of the Elizabethan age. He helped reintroduce Euclid to Europe by writing a very good preface. He was an expert in navigational equipment and techniques, and he invented some of the navigational apparatus which made the great voyages of discovery possible. At some point in his career, he came across an Aztec obsidian divination mirror. You know, obsidian is that black, glassy volcanic rock such as is found in Mexico. And when the Spaniards went to the New World, they brought one of these objects back for study. And the Aztec priests would gaze into this and to try to figure out what was going to happen in the future. As John Dee experimented with this object, he was surprised to see that he was able to have visions. He describes how spirits would appear at first in the mirror and then come out of the mirror into the room that would carry on audible conversations.
John Dee may have also applied his obsidian stone gazing to more political ends. He is reputed to have been one of Queen Elizabeth's spies who kept her informed of the activities of her arch-enemy Spain. It is known that the code he used to sign his messages to Her Royal Majesty was 007. Clear depth or mirror gazing also persisted in a more pervasive but less threatening form through popular culture. It features prominently in fairy tales and legends. In the Grimm brothers' Snow White, the wicked queen continually turns to her mirror, mirror on the wall. The original story of Aladdin tells us the genie appeared not from the lamp, but reflected in it. 19th century writer Lewis Carroll gave us the unforgettable Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. Early 20th century Halloween cards frequently show mirrors reflecting ghosts, goblins, and straw-haired sweethearts. And the advertisers of the era knew a good thing when they saw it. They offered a future filled with a brand new sewing machine. And the trend continues right up to the present. In the Disney blockbuster, The Lion King, a young Simba gazes into a pool and hears words of assurance from his dead father. But while myths and the movies can rely on magic, Raymond Moody needed something more concrete. He was searching now for a practical way to encourage apparitional experiences, and he turned once more to the Greek oracles of the dead.
It's quite surprising, but nonetheless true, that there were lots of oracles of the dead in antiquity, and apparently they operated in different ways. They had different methods. And the ones in which the apparition of the departed was actually made to appear, and the visitors would actually see the apparition of the departed, were called psychomantiums. And so I created my own psychomantium. The way I did it was that I mounted a wall mirror in an upstairs room in my research facility, mounted it so that the bottom edge of the mirror is about 32 inches off the floor. surrounded the entire area of the mirror with a black velvet curtain to exclude reflections, put a very comfortable easy chair right in front of the mirror, took the legs of the chair off so that it sits low down to the floor, and so that the person sitting in the chair and looking up into the mirror does not see his or her own reflection. Behind the chair there is a dim light bulb mounted so that it casts a diffuse illumination up over the back of the chair. And when all the lights are turned out and the only illumination is coming from this light bulb behind the chair, that provides a really spectacular optical clear depth. We ask each subject to choose one person who's died that they want to see again, and I get them to choose mementos, things that the deceased person owned which they very poignantly associate with the life of that person. And then they come out to my facility, and typically we take a walk in the country, and during that time I really explore with them in a very deep way, well, why do you want to do this? What's your motivation for doing this, and so on. We have a very extended encounter during which I really get down with these people and get them to tell me all about the relationship that they had had with the departed person. I want to know everything about this person, like what kind of person was this, what was their personality like, what did they look like, what are your good memories of this person, what are your not so good memories of this person, how did they die, how did you react to the death, what do you miss most about them. Really a very intense exploration of the relationship that they had had with the deceased person. Then I get them to show me the mementos that they have brought, and I get them to tell me the significance of each one of these mementos. When they've reached this point of almost like a saturation of talking about the deceased individual, we lead them into the apparition chamber proper. I put them in there, let them sit in the chair, and tell them that they are to just relax in there and gaze far, far away into the mirror and sit there and sort of review some of the things that we've talked about, to sit there expectantly, waiting, in effect, for the apparition of the departed person to appear, which in a surprisingly high percentage of cases it actually does. Our subjects will report typically at first seeing a cloud or a mist, like the mirror fogs over, as it were, and then this mist dissipates, and then the apparition of the departed person may appear at first often in the distance in the mirror, and then the apparition of the departed person seems to emerge from the mirrored surface and come out right in front of the subject. They often see it full color, full size, 3 dimensions, apparently quite solid, sitting right across from them.
They were coming from the mirror to being in the room or past me, I would say within about 1 to 2 seconds would take to do each one. So it was fairly rapid, this kind of a pacing.
You know, Diane brought me in and she told me, you know, what to expect, and she said, I'll be back to get you in about a half an hour, 45 minutes. And when she came and opened the door, it seemed like she had just walked out, like it was only a few minutes. Really didn't seem like a long time at all.
I sat for 40 straight minutes and watched one figure, full color, 3-dimensional to a point, but not lifelike in the sense that I couldn't ever have a sense of seeing through it. It was had that sense of airiness to that, but not vague. It wasn't the ghostly kind of figure that you normally see portrayed, they were very visible and very clear.
I was gazing into the mirror and totally relaxed, you know. And at first I didn't really see anything, and I was getting images of light. I didn't see any, just, you know, face. I couldn't tell any face to anything, but what I saw first, what you would, I guess it was like a goldish green type of light, and it was like just floating.
A number of our subjects also report the experience of going into the mirror themselves. They feel at a certain point that they go, just like Alice did, and through the looking glass, in effect, into the mirror, and it's in this, this unusual alternate dimension that they meet up with their departed relatives who seem to be there again, right in front of them, very vividly, and communicating.
When I first sat in there for a while, I was wondering if anything was going to come up. I never got the real clouds or anything like that. I just started to see pieces of images. I'm probably not going to remember in the order because it started out very slow at first. And as things progressed, things started coming up more and more. My eyes did continue to tear, like I said to you. Had happened before, but it was funny, with that chair sitting back like this, I could just let it run down, and I was fine. I saw Laura.
It's like then I all of a sudden I started to cry. I just, because I wanted it so bad, but I didn't know if I didn't know why I was crying, you know. And then I calmed down again, and I said, well, let me close my eyes again. And I did, and that was it. It wasn't, you know, I thought I might have smelled something, but then I couldn't distinguish what it, you know, what it really was. It wasn't anything familiar.
Before I ever even conducted a single person through this procedure, I went and asked a very dear friend of mine, Dr. William Rold, who has studied spontaneous apparitions of the departed for over 40 years, whether to his knowledge there had ever been a single case in which harm had come to anyone from an apparitional encounter. And Bill said to me, absolutely not, but that not only that, typically these experiences are very beneficial because they enable people to smooth over the rough edges in a relationship and to perhaps get their grief resolved a bit, and so that they can go on with their lives. And nonetheless, I do caution people, don't do this alone. This can be very, very powerful material.
I've often been asked, was I scared? And certainly fear came up on occasion as I saw things like wolves and things coming out of the mirror. Who knows what was going to come out of the mirror, and could it possibly hurt me? Those fears came and went because of my belief system.
There's no question in the minds of subjects who go through this that they are in a waking state of awareness at the time, and that the experience lacks that kind of surrealistic flavor that we have in dreams. That the perception seems absolutely real. That they have the sense of the presence of the person, that they seem palpably there. 15% of our subjects report being hugged or touched and actually having tactile experience of the event. And the whole thing seems incredibly real. One has the impression in going through it that it is a real contact and a real experience of seeing a departed loved one.
What did it for me was I got a pat on the top of the head, and I turned around to see, you know, because I had stretched back a little bit, and I got like a pat, and I turned around and I thought maybe I hit the ceiling or something because the ceiling slopes, but I put my hand up, I couldn't even reach it with my hand, and well, that was real, you know, I felt it. Now, I don't know if that was my son's way of, he likes to kid around, he knows I like my hair in proper place, maybe, I don't know, but I definitely did feel something.
I had the definite sensation that somebody came in from behind the mirror around to my left side and was just kind of being there. And I wasn't quite sure who it was or, you know, if it was my grandmother or not. But a little while after that, I heard a cat meow, and she really loved cats. So I felt that, you know, that was the connection, that she had been there. It was intuitive. I was asking the question internally, and I don't really know how I got the answer. It just kind of gelled mentally for me. That's the thing about the psychomantium, is that there's a lot of different ways to receive information. A lot of people experience information visually. I've had oral or hearing type of information. I've smelled different smells or scents, as well as just intuitively received information. It can be a very visionary experience.
Now, I am the first to add, and immediately want to go on to add here, that the fact that people report it as real does not mean, in a scientific context, that it was real. But the importance of the fact that it's experienced as a real event from the scientific perspective is that this means that we have, in fact, recreated the experience of seeing apparitions, that this gives us a good theoretical model, as it were, for the experience of seeing apparitions, because that's exactly what people who see apparitions of departed loved ones spontaneously will tell us, that they interpret it to be a real encounter, a real event.
I'm still somewhat skeptical. I don't know what it is. I have no doubt there's something going on. I have no doubt that this is energy from someplace else. It may someday turn out to come to the realization that it's some sort of energy that comes not from the plane where people are deceased and not here, but from some other plane. But without a doubt, it does not come from what we think of as being reality. I know for a fact that the experiences I've had, particularly my parade of images, was not faked. It was extremely real. There's no way that could have happened. There's no way that could have been faked. I was truly taken back. This was the experience that I was looking for to tell me that this phenomenon was like no other that I'd ever had. And I needed that, because although my experiences on most people's point of view would have in meditation, etc., would have been pretty profound, it wasn't profound to me because I've had them so many times. This was the experience that I had been looking for to say, no, something's different here. This is not your normal everyday experience. This is exceptional. So I was just, to use a very clinical word, blown away. I was, as I said, I was looking around in the room, looking at these figures as they hovered over me and passed by me, and saying, I don't believe this is happening. This is amazing. So, to say the least, I was pretty taken back. And it was very happy, very joyful, relaxing.
It does calm you. It does have I was very nervous going, and you knew that, you know. I didn't know what to expect. And it does kind of calm you, and I can't get over that I was in there for that long. I really can't get past that. It just seemed like 5 minutes, and, you know, like I had this whole long time to wait. And it was over, you know.
He has such an inner calm and peace about him. I wonder sometimes, does he know something the rest of us don't know? Does he have some connection we don't know about? But when we did get married. We even said in our wedding vows that this was it, to the tunnel and beyond. You know, my background was in broadcasting, and I was in public affairs, and I knew lots of people who fed a lot of lip service to helping others. And that's mostly what I heard about all day long, every day. And now I'm actually with somebody whose life is dedicated to truly helping other people through what appears to be some of the most difficult times of their lives, when they've lost loved ones or they're dealing with horrendous issues of grief. When you're grieving, you don't realize, and nobody can really tell you, that grief is a process, because you feel like it's a state of being. This is the way I'm always going to feel, and I can't do this, you know, it's too hard. And Raymond is able, through his work and his research, to alleviate that for so many people. I get tears in my eyes all the time when we're at conferences, because people in all languages all over the world will come up to him and say, Dr. Moody, thank you so much. Your book saved my life. We have found out since the book was published that there are people all over the world that have been doing this clear depth or mirror gazing for many, many, many years, just for creativity purposes or reunion purposes. And it's been interesting to see how many people knew about this. This was not exactly a secret. But here's Raymond again, putting it out there.
Don't even think about it. Wait a second. Wait, you couldn't even It's so funny always. Can we have everybody's attention just for a minute? We don't want to be too formal. We just want to welcome you all.
Yes, we just want to say, welcome, welcome, welcome.
To our home.
Yes, we want to offer you whatever knowledge we have about this procedure, and spend the week.
When Raymond's book was published in France, we had the opportunity to be over there at the time, and it's incredible how widely accepted in France and in Spain and in other countries Raymond's work is. People are, in the French in particular, who are really very almost snobbish about everything having to be proven and being scientific. They're so accepting of Raymond and his work. He spoke recently at the Sorbonne, and it wasn't just standing room only. I mean, it was literally the kind of thing where you say people were swinging from the rafters. I mean, there were so many people there and had so many interesting questions. But they are very accepting of the work that he's doing. And whereas we might say, oh yeah, right, prove it. You're telling me people are seeing departed loved ones in the mirror. I'm finding that in Spain and France and other parts of Europe, they're not saying prove it, they're saying tell me more. He's talked to over 3,000 people who've had this experience. People want to talk about it in the workshops, and I'm just awed by the fact that he still has the kind of interest and delight that he has in listening to other folks' stories and hearing all about these experiences. We hear from many, many, many doctors, anesthesiologists, pediatrician, cardiologist, folks who are dealing with life and death every day. And a number of times I have heard them say to Raymond, you know, I wasn't buying this until such and such. A doctor from my hometown, who is my grandmother's physician and was my grandfather many years ago, his physician, said to me, oh, I'm glad that Raymond's book is out, because now I have somewhere to refer people to his new work, because, you know, for many years I've heard from widows and widowers how they're talking to their lost loved ones and asking me, did I think it was okay or was it normal? And he said, I'm relieved now to have a place to send them for more information. And I think it's just so common, and there's so much common experience that when people have an opportunity to meet Raymond and to talk to him, usually they have a story to tell.
I wrote Reunions because I wanted to get this information out. I think that whatever one makes of these findings about the apparitions seen in a psychomantium, it's important work. And for me, of course, the main response I want to see happen is my colleagues in psychology and so on. I want to see them reproducing this phenomenon and seeing what they make of it. And that's already happened. To my knowledge, so far 9 other psychologists have fully replicated this. One of these individuals is a woman who works in Houston at a very well-known hospice there. She's been a hospice counselor dealing with the terminally ill and their families now for a long, long time, very well respected in the community. And she's using this for therapy to help people, face death and to face the losses that they've gone through in their lives.
In helping people walk through the grief process and knowing that there is life after death, it's tremendously healing for them. Actually, in my work, I've never worked with a dying patient who did not have an apparitional experience. I mean, it's 100%. You can write this in stone. If a person is terminally ill, one that's close to death, they're going to have an apparitional experience. In fact, one thing that we do, I know in hospice, if a person has had an apparitional experience or if they've had a reunion, that person becomes top priority because we know death is imminent. That it's always within 1 week or 2 weeks that a person is going to die. No matter if we think maybe they've got 6 months, we're not real sure if hospice even ought to take them in. But once a person has that apparitional experience, if they have a terminal illness, we know that person is greeting them, they're loving them, and they're escorting them to the other side. And then people in bereavement groups, there's a high number who also have a reunion. So when I was very familiar with this, it was like a common everyday occurrence. And hearing Dr. Moody speak for the first time, I was on the edge of my seat. I said, how could he do this under controlled circumstances? It was just incredible to me, the thought that he could do that. 62 people have been through the Oracle in Houston. Out of the 62, 48 have had some type of reunion experience. And actually, I call mine Oracle because Oracle means a place for acquiring wisdom. And I have found that even when a person comes and has a session, even if they do not have a reunion, something very profound, a deep psychological, a deep psychic change takes place for them.
The success of the modern psychomantium, both at his own facility and elsewhere, has led Raymond Moody to direct his lifelong research into the nature of death yet one step further.
It's well known that people on their deathbeds, dying people who do go on to die, very often just prior to their death will say something like, oh, why, there's Mother, or there's Grandpa, or whatever. In other words, it seems that at the moment of death, they see apparitions of departed relatives and friends who seem to be there, as it were, to meet them or to help them through this transition. From time to time, physicians, nurses, other people at the bedside of dying patients will say that they have an experience in which they seem to see the person leave the body at the moment of death. Also, I've talked with a number of physicians and nurses and also friends of people who died, relatives of people who died, who tell me that they have undergone what I can only call empathetic near-death experiences. These are experiences in which, for instance, the physician who's resuscitating someone who's very close to them will say that as this person dies and begins to slip into this experience of seeing the tunnel and going out of the body and so on, that the physician himself or herself will begin to experience this, will actually enter into the near-death experience of the dying person.
In earlier times, the role of today's caregivers was performed by a medicine man, or shaman. The Greeks had a name for such individuals who would guide the dying part way into the next realm and help alleviate their fears. They called that person a psychopomp, and the most celebrated psychopomp of the ancient Greeks was the god Hermes. Appropriately, therefore, Raymond Moody has named this latest phase of his research the Hermes Project.
Now, putting all of this together, what I'm going to do is this. We'll have a room, which is the dome. up above it. But the bottom part of this structure will be a very comfortable bedroom and equipped like a medical facility with nurses and so on to help a dying person. I'm inquiring around among people that I know who have had a near-death experience and who now have a terminal illness, and they can foresee that within a certain period of time they will die. And I'm asking for volunteers of that description who have an interest in the human mind and are willing to participate in a project that will hopefully enable us to understand more about the near-death experience and perhaps more about the dying process. They will, at the time of their death, or when it becomes increasingly obvious that they are in their final days, they will be brought to this facility, and then together we will enter into this structure, into the bedroom with the dome up above. And then, since these are individuals who have already had familiarity with the near-death experience, having already gone through it, hopefully they will actually be able to guide us through the mirror into the next realm. I am fully cognizant that this sounds completely fantastic, but I'm quite sure it will work. Why should we do this? Well, we will be able to understand the inner worlds of shamans a lot more clearly, that we'll be able to see that actually they were doing something, that there was a phenomenal altered state of awareness that they were capable of entering into. And I think we should try to understand altered states of consciousness as much as we can. And secondly, I know from personal experiences there are so many people out there who die in a terrified and very frightened state. I think that as we pursue the Hermes Project and we get together a group of investigators who have had this experience firsthand of going through the mirror, as it were, into an altered kind of reality, that hopefully we'll be able to be of service to people who are terminally ill and who are afraid of dying, because we'll be able to be there with them and to help them into these altered states of consciousness that seem to happen at the point of death in a way to make it a lot more comfortable experience for them. To me, it's such an intriguing idea that in the ancient world there was an institution for 1,000 years where you could go, and there you could have the experience of seeing and visiting with and talking with departed relatives. And I wouldn't be too surprised if over the next few years this institution reappears in our modern world. And I'm so looking forward to seeing that as it develops. To see how people respond to this, to see how our society integrates this. My hope for it is that it will turn out to be something very therapeutic, and that it will help people who are undergoing prolonged grief, who just can't let go of a loved one lost to death, and for that reason are miserable themselves. And one of the most common things that you hear people say at that time is, if I only had 5 more minutes. What we can do now, without a doubt, is that we can give people that 5 more minutes. If we can help people like this turn themselves around and open up to hope and to a new life, then I think all of this would be justified.